Tonight, we will tell you a story from the heart of ancient Greek mythology, a tale not just of a monster, but of a profound tragedy, divine intervention, and an accidental creation. You may know Medusa as the terrifying Gorgon with venomous snakes for hair, whose gaze could turn any living thing to stone, but few truly understand the circumstances of her birth into monstrosity. This is the story of how Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, through a moment of impulsive desire, inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that transformed a beautiful, devout priestess into a creature of fear, leaving an unexpected and complex legacy in the annals of time. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories that weave ancient history into soothing narratives for sleep, consider subscribing to the channel and pressing the bell icon so you never miss another journey into the past. Here, knowledge and dreams intertwine. All right, find a comfortable spot, settle in, and let your body sink into the soft comfort of your bed or chair. Take a deep, calming breath, releasing the day's worries with each exhale. Close your eyes, let your muscles relax, and allow your mind to prepare for a journey back in time. Our story begins long before the snakes, before the terror, in a time when Medusa was simply a young woman renowned for her extraordinary beauty and deep piety. Her story begins not with the monstrous image you might know, but with beauty, purity, and a life dedicated to the gods. Medusa, before she was a creature of fear, was a mortal woman, born into a world where the divine and human often intertwined. She was a mortal, but her beauty was legendary, even among those on Olympus. Her most striking feature, the one that drew the most admiration and wonder, was her hair. It cascaded around her, a silken river of dark, lustrous strands. So captivating it was compared to woven night, alive with a vibrant sheen that seemed to absorb and reflect light. It was said that no mortal woman, nor even many goddesses, could boast such a glorious crown. This natural splendor, however, was not what truly defined her life. Instead, Medusa chose a path of devotion, dedicating her existence to the service of one of the most powerful and revered deities of the Greek pantheon, Athena. Athena, goddess of wisdom, warfare, and handicrafts, embodied strategic thought and skilled artistry. Her temples were places of profound sanctity, revered by all, and her priestesses were chosen for their unwavering commitment to purity and devotion. Medusa, with her innate grace and profound sense of piety, was selected to serve in Athena's most sacred temple in Athens, a city that bore the goddess's very name and was a beacon of civilization and intellectual pursuit. Within these hallowed walls, Medusa found her purpose. Her days were spent in ritual, prayer, and the meticulous upkeep of the temple. She tended to the sacred flames that burned eternally before Athena's altar, ensuring their light never faltered. She meticulously cleaned the intricate carvings and polished the gleaming statues that depicted the goddess in her various forms, from the warrior in full armor to the patroness of crafts. Her hands, accustomed to delicate weaving and sacred rites, were also strong from maintaining the grand edifice. The air within the temple was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of olive oil, incense, and fresh flowers. The sunlight, filtering through high windows, cast long, shifting shadows across the marble floors, creating an atmosphere of serene contemplation. Medusa moved through this space with a quiet reverence, her footsteps soft, her movements graceful, embodying the very stillness and purity that the temple demanded. She lived a life of strict celibacy, a vow she had taken upon entering Athena's service, for the goddess herself was a virgin deity, and her priestesses were expected to emulate her immaculate state. This purity was not merely physical, but spiritual, a commitment to inner sanctity reflecting divine order. Medusa embraced this path wholeheartedly. Her devotion was absolute, her faith unshakable. She believed that by dedicating her life to Athena, she was not only honoring the goddess, but also finding true peace and purpose for herself. She spent countless hours in quiet reflection, meditating on Athena's wisdom, studying ancient texts, and perfecting her sacred duties. Her voice, chanting hymns of praise, was clear and melodious, echoing softly within the vast stone chambers. The temple was her world, a sanctuary from the outside, a place where the clamor of mortal life faded into a distant hum. Here, surrounded by the symbols of divine power and wisdom, Medusa felt safe, protected, and truly herself. She was a beacon of devotion, a living testament to the power of faith and the beauty of dedication. Her presence was a source of calm and inspiration, her commitment admired by all who knew her. Every morning, as dawn touched the temple, Medusa began her duties, preparing offerings, arranging garlands, ensuring the sacred space was in perfect order. The quiet rhythm of her days unfolded within the ancient stones, a life of profound tranquility. She found solace in the steady glow of the sacred lamps and the cool touch of the marble beneath her bare feet. This was Medusa, the woman before destiny, driven by the reckless desires of a powerful god, would twist her fate beyond recognition and transform her into a legend of terror and sorrow. Her story, in its purest form, was one of quiet service and unblemished beauty. A life lived in the shadow of the divine, yet soon to be shattered by an act of profound disrespect and tragic consequence. Deep beneath the restless waves, in a realm of shimmering coral and echoing silence, a place where sunlight fractured into a million dancing motes and ancient currents whispered forgotten tales, resided Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the sea. He was the earth shaker, his footsteps resonating through the very bedrock of the world. The storm bringer, capable of conjuring tempests that turned the calmest waters into raging maelstroms, swallowing entire fleets whole, or calming the most furious squalls with a mere almost imperceptible gesture of his formidable trident. As brother to Zeus, the king of the gods, his power was immense, stretching across all oceans, encompassing the boundless blue expanse and reaching down into the abyssal depths where light never truly touched. He commanded not only the vast liquid realm, but also the myriad creatures within it, from the smallest, most delicate seahorse to the greatest, most ancient leviathans, whose movements could stir the ocean floor. His nature was as vast and unpredictable as the tides themselves, sometimes benevolent, granting safe passage to mariners, sometimes wrathful, unleashing devastating floods upon the land, but always driven by powerful primal urges, a force of nature personified. It was this powerful and often volatile deity, Poseidon, whose gaze, accustomed to surveying endless churning waters and the boundless horizons of his watery kingdom, one day turned towards the mortal world, to the sun-drenched city of Athens. His attention was drawn not by a grand battle, nor by a monumental feat of human engineering, but by a quiet sanctuary, a beacon of purity and devotion, the revered temple of Athena. Within its hallowed marble walls, dedicated to the stern and wise goddess, Medusa served as a priestess, living a life of profound celibacy and sacred duty. Her beauty, as we spoke of, was truly remarkable, but it was her hair, her crowning glory, a cascade of dark, lustrous strands that seemed to ripple like the very currents of the deep, that truly captivated the sea god. It shimmered with an ethereal light, a vibrant, almost living contrast to the solemnity of her sacred vows and the quiet dignity of her chosen path. What began as a distant observation, a mere flicker of detached interest from the profound depths of the sea, swiftly transformed into a potent, unyielding, and ultimately destructive desire within the heart of the earthshaker. Poseidon, a deity of immense power and equally immense, often unchecked passions, was not accustomed to denial. His divine will was absolute, a force that bent the very fabric of reality to his command, and his desires, once ignited within his powerful form, burned with an intensity that brooked no opposition, no argument, no mortal plea. The very idea of a mortal woman, however devout, however pure, dedicating herself to perpetual celibacy in the service of another god, particularly one as formidable and unyielding as Athena, served only to fuel his growing obsession. He saw Medusa not merely as a humble priestess, a servant of his sister, but as a prize, a challenge to his unchecked power, and an object for his boundless desire. Her very inaccessibility made her all the more desirable in his eyes, a forbidden fruit he felt compelled to possess. The quiet sanctity of her life, the tranquil devotion she embodied, offered no protection against the rising tide of his divine longing. The sanctity of Athena's temple itself, the solemn vows Medusa had taken before the very altar of the goddess, her chosen path of purity and unwavering devotion. These were, to a god of Poseidon's temperament, not insurmountable barriers, nor sacred boundaries to be respected, but rather temporary obstacles, inconvenient details in the face of his overwhelming will. He was a god accustomed to taking what he desired, to bending the world, both mortal and divine, to his formidable and unyielding will. The concept of restraint, of respecting boundaries, was utterly alien to him when his colossal passions were aroused. His desire for Medusa grew, a relentless, all-consuming tide within him, rising higher and higher, sweeping aside all considerations of propriety, of sacred law, or of consequence. He began to think of nothing else, his powerful ancient mind consumed by the vivid, compelling image of her radiant beauty, the captivating flow of her hair, the very essence of her serene grace that he so desperately craved to possess. This burgeoning obsession, a force as uncontrollable and destructive as the deepest, most treacherous currents of his own oceanic realm, a force that cared nothing for mortal suffering or divine wrath, would soon lead him to an act of profound and unforgivable transgression. It was an act that would not only violate the sacred space of his sister goddess Athena, defiling her hallowed ground, but also shatter Medusa's peaceful existence, irrevocably altering her destiny and condemning her to a monstrous fate she could never have imagined. This single, impulsive act of divine desire, driven by Poseidon's immense and unbridled power, would set in motion a tragic chain of events that echoed across the ages, reverberating through myth and legend for millennia. It would forever intertwine the fates of a beautiful mortal, a powerful, impulsive god, and a formidable, vengeful goddess, culminating in a legend whispered in awe and fear to this very day. The peace Medusa had found in her devotion, the quiet purpose of her life, was now precarious, poised to be irrevocably shattered by a force far greater than any mortal could ever hope to withstand, a force driven by unchecked divine will and overwhelming desire. The stage was now tragically set for a confrontation of divine wills and mortal innocence, where the quiet temple, once a haven of sanctity, was about to become the site of a profound and devastating violation, all because of the sea god's insatiable and destructive longing. The air within Athena's temple was always still, a sanctuary of profound peace and hallowed quietude, a place where the mortal world seemed to recede, giving way to the divine. It was not merely a structure of intricately carved stone and polished marble, but a living embodiment of the goddess's very essence, her unparalleled wisdom, her strategic brilliance in warfare, and perhaps most significantly, her unblemished purity and stern adherence to justice. Every meticulously crafted column, every sacred artifact placed with precise reverence, every soft, ethereal flicker of the oil lamps that cast a gentle glow upon the ancient, dignified statues, spoke of an unwavering order and an undeniable divine truth. The faint, persistent scent of consecrated incense, a delicate blend of myrrh and frankincense, mingled with the clean, cool aroma of polished stone, permeated the air, creating an atmosphere of profound and unassailable reverence. Medusa, with her extraordinary striking beauty and her unwavering spirit, was the very heart of this sanctity. Her days and nights were a continuous, unbroken flow of prayer, meticulous ritual, and devoted service, her every action a deliberate testament to her profound and singular dedication to the goddess. Her hair, renowned throughout the land for its captivating golden luster, was often adorned with the sacred ribbons of the goddess, a visible, tangible sign of her commitment, her untouched grace, and her entire life consecrated solely to the divine. She was not merely a priestess. She was a vessel of the goddess's will, a vigilant guardian of the sacred flame, her devotion as constant and pure as the most pristine mountain springs. But the mighty sea god, Poseidon, whose dominion was the boundless, restless, and often chaotic ocean, acknowledged no such boundaries of reverence, no such strictures of restraint. His immense, unfathomable power was matched only by the intensity of his desires, which, once ignited within his formidable being, burned with an unyielding, consuming ferocity, defying all reason, all respect for divine decree, and all regard for mortal sanctity. He was a primordial force of nature, untamed and unyielding, accustomed to taking what he willed, when he willed it, regardless of the consequences that might ripple through the mortal or even the divine realms, or the sacred laws that governed the cosmic order. The temple's hallowed walls, meticulously crafted and consecrated to offer refuge and protect the sacred, were to him merely an ephemeral barrier, a temporary and insignificant inconvenience in the path of his overwhelming unchecked will. The concept of sacrilege, of violating a space imbued with divine power and purpose, was utterly foreign to his impulsive, tempestuous nature when driven by such powerful, all-consuming urges. One fateful night, as the moon ascended to its zenith, casting long silver shadows across the cold, smooth temple floor, and the city outside lay in the deep, unsuspecting slumber of peace, Poseidon entered. His arrival was not heralded by the thunderous roar of waves crashing upon distant shores or the dramatic clash of titans in the heavens. Instead, it was marked by an unsettling, almost suffocating stillness that descended upon the sacred chamber. A sudden, heavy, oppressive pressure permeated the air, as if the very atmosphere of the hallowed space recoiled, physically shrinking and gasping from his invasive, uninvited intrusion. The oil lamps, which had burned with a steady, unwavering light for centuries, flickered violently, their flames momentarily dimming to mere embers, as if in a silent, desperate protest against the impending profound violation. Medusa, alone in her solitary vigil, her thoughts lost in the quiet contemplation of prayer, felt an inexplicable icy chill pierce the peaceful quiet of her devotion. It was a premonition, sharp, undeniable, and utterly terrifying. A sudden, horrifying understanding that the sanctity she guarded with her very life was about to be breached in the most profound and irreparable way. There was no escape, no hidden corner within the temple's intricate design, no hallowed ground that could offer refuge or protection from a God whose will was as vast, as inescapable, and as overwhelming as the boundless, crushing oceans he commanded. In that hallowed place, a sanctuary specifically consecrated for veneration, for spiritual solace, and for the purest expressions of faith. Poseidon, consumed entirely by his unchecked, relentless passion, brutally violated not only the sanctity of the temple, but also the innocence and unblemished purity of its dedicated priestess. The act itself, though swift and obscured by the sacred shadows of the dimly lit chamber, was irrevocably destructive, a cataclysmic event that tore through the fabric of Medusa's existence. It was a profound transgression, a defilement of the highest order, an act that ripped through the very veil of sacred protection that Athena's temple was meant to provide, exposing its vulnerability and the fragility of mortal devotion. The silence that descended in its wake was not one of peace or completion, but of profound shock, of an irreversible rupture, and of an irreparable damage inflicted upon the very soul of the sanctuary. The ancient, unyielding stones of the temple seemed to absorb the outrage, holding within their cold, unfeeling depths the echo of a purity irrevocably shattered, a sanctity forever stained. The air, once fragrant with the pure essence of incense, now seemed thick and heavy with the unspoken horror of what had transpired, a silent scream of desecration. This was far more than a personal tragedy for Medusa, a grievous wound inflicted upon an innocent mortal. It was a direct, audacious, and unforgivable affront to Athena herself. The temple was not merely her earthly dwelling place, a place of worship. It was a physical manifestation of her divine presence, her absolute authority, and her very being. To defile it in such a manner was to challenge Athena's sovereignty, to mock her immense, formidable power, and to desecrate everything she stood for: wisdom, strategic warfare, the inviolable nature of justice, and the sacred principles of order. It was an act of unparalleled hubris, a blatant and arrogant disregard for the sacred covenant that bound gods and mortals in a delicate balance of worship and protection, and an insult of such monumental magnitude that it could not, under any circumstances, go unanswered. The purity that Medusa had so diligently maintained throughout her life, the sanctity of the temple that had been her singular purpose and devotion, were now irrevocably tarnished, shattered beyond any hope of repair. The consequences of this single impulsive act of divine arrogance, born of unchecked desire, would not only ripple through the annals of time, but would transform a devout, innocent priestess into a terrifying figure of monstrous form and profound despair. It would forever alter the course of her existence, reshaping her destiny into a monstrous fate and casting a long, indelible shadow over the delicate, often volatile relationship between the powerful, sometimes capricious gods and the vulnerable, often suffering mortals who worship them. The stage was now irrevocably set for the terrible, unyielding wrath of a goddess profoundly scorned, a wrath that, in its terrible swiftness and overwhelming force, would fall not upon the powerful divine transgressor, but tragically and unjustly upon the innocent, devout victim of his unchecked desire and monumental disrespect. The echoes of this violation would resonate through myth for millennia, a grim and haunting reminder of divine power's capacity for both creation and irreversible, devastating destruction. The air within the hallowed halls of Athena's temple, usually serene and filled with the quiet hum of devotion, suddenly shifted. It was not a physical change, discernible to mortal eyes, but a profound disruption felt by the goddess herself, a tremor in the very essence of her divine domain. Athena, the wise and formidable daughter of Zeus, a deity born fully formed from her father's head, embodied strategic warfare, profound wisdom, and the intricate arts. Her temples were not mere buildings of stone and marble. They were extensions of her divine presence, consecrated spaces where mortal purity, intellectual pursuit, and unwavering reverence were upheld above all else. They were sanctuaries, places of refuge and sacred trust, where the boundaries between the mortal and the divine were most clearly defined and most rigorously protected. When the sanctity of her sanctuary, a space dedicated to virginity and profound spiritual devotion, was brutally violated, the affront resonated through the very fabric of her being, a shock wave of desecration that mirrored the physical act within its walls. Her awareness was immediate and absolute, a chilling certainty that pierced through the usual calm of Olympus. A goddess of her stature, whose foresight often bordered on omniscience, did not need mortal eyes to witness the transgression. The defilement of her altars, the brutal act perpetrated within the very heart of her sacred precinct, was a wound inflicted directly upon her honor, a blasphemy that stained her reputation and challenged her very identity. It was a direct challenge to her authority, a profound disrespect for the sacred oaths taken by her priestesses, and an audacious violation of the divine order Poseidon, as an Olympian, was sworn to uphold. The act was not merely a crime against a mortal woman, Medusa, but an unforgivable sacrilege against the goddess herself, an insult of the highest order that demanded a response both swift and terrible. Athena's reaction was not one of fleeting, passionate rage, but of cold, unyielding fury, born of a deep-seated commitment to justice, the preservation of divine law, and the strict upholding of boundaries between mortal and immortal realms. She was a goddess who valued order, propriety, and the sanctity of oaths, and this unholy act shattered all three within her most sacred precinct. The violation left an indelible stain upon the very stones of her temple, a spiritual defilement that permeated the air, demanding immediate and unequivocal retribution. To allow such an act to stand unpunished would be to diminish her own power, to weaken the authority of the divine pantheon, and to invite further contempt from mortals who might then believe the gods powerless or indifferent. The silence that followed the violation within the temple walls, usually one of respectful contemplation, now felt heavy with the weight of unspeakable transgression, a silence that screamed of disrespect. Her gaze, typically filled with strategic insight, calm judgment, and the light of pure reason, now burned with an incandescent wrath, a cold fire that promised irreversible change. She could not directly punish Poseidon, a powerful brother of Zeus and a fellow Olympian, without risking a devastating conflict that could shake the very foundations of Olympus, potentially plunging the divine realm into chaos. The intricate balance of power among the gods, the delicate web of alliances and rivalries that held their world together, dictated a more nuanced approach, one that avoided direct confrontation with a deity of his stature. However, the one who bore the immediate visible mark of the defilement, the one whose presence in the temple at the precise moment of sacrilege had, in Athena's severe and unyielding judgment, allowed the transgression to occur, was Medusa. In Athena's eyes, Medusa, despite being the victim of Poseidon's brutal impulse, had become an unwitting embodiment of the temple's defilement, a living reminder of the shame inflicted upon the goddess. Her extraordinary beauty, once a symbol of her devotion and purity, now served as a bitter and constant reminder of the act that had shamed the goddess and desecrated her holy ground. It was a beauty that had attracted the god of the sea, drawing his unwanted attention and leading directly to the irreparable breach of sacred trust. Thus, the goddess, with a chilling, almost surgical resolve, determined that the punishment must fall upon Medusa, transforming her into a terrifying example of divine wrath. This transformation would serve as a living monument to the dire consequences of sacrilege and the absolute violation of Athena's sacred space. The retribution would be swift, absolute, and meticulously designed to ensure that no mortal would ever again dare to defile her temple or disregard her divine authority. The very essence of Medusa's being would be twisted into a grotesque reflection of the horror that had transpired, her alluring beauty replaced by a monstrous form that instilled abject terror, her once captivating gaze forever reflecting the goddess's unyielding fury and the cold, hard justice of Olympus. This was not merely personal vengeance, it was a reassertion of divine power, a ritualistic cleansing by transformation, and an indelible warning etched into the very fabric of myth, a testament to the terrible price of disrespecting a goddess. The goddess Athena, whose sacred domain was absolute, felt the violation of her temple as a searing wound. Her anger, a cold, devastating fire, turned not upon the mighty Poseidon, whom she could not directly challenge without risking a devastating conflict among the Olympians, but upon the one who had been at the heart of the sacrilege, Medusa. It was Medusa's profound beauty, her flowing hair, and her presence within the hallowed sanctuary that had, in Athena's unyielding judgment, become the unwitting catalyst for the transgression. The goddess, therefore, chose to make Medusa a living, terrifying monument to the immediate consequences of such profound disrespect, a chilling warning etched into her being. The transformation was not gradual. It was immediate, agonizing, and horrifying. You can imagine the sudden, intense pain that must have coursed through Medusa's scalp, a dreadful sensation as her exquisite golden hair, once her crowning glory, began to writhe and contort with an unnatural life. Each strand, once soft and silken, twisted violently into a living, venomous serpent. The delicate coils of her braids became a tangled, shifting mass of cold, dry Medusa, once a beacon of mortal beauty and a symbol of devout service, now stood as a horrifying testament to divine wrath. Her transformation was not merely a change in form. It was an irrevocable severance from her past, from her humanity, and from any semblance of the life she had once known. Where soft, flowing tresses had once cascaded, a writhing mass of venomous serpents now hissed, their scales glinting in the dim light, their forked tongues flicking, a constant chilling reminder of the curse that bound her. Her once gentle eyes, capable of reflecting the devotion in her soul, now held a terrifying power. Any mortal gaze that met hers would instantly turn to stone, freezing life into lifeless sculpture. The sacred temple, once her sanctuary and purpose, could no longer contain her. It had been desecrated, and she, the unwitting victim, was now its monstrous manifestation. Athena, in her righteous fury, could not allow such a creature born of sacrilege and divine punishment to remain among mortals. And so Medusa was cast out. She was banished not merely from the temple, nor just from the city where she had once been revered, but from the entire civilized world. Her exile was absolute, a sentence of perpetual isolation, a fate far crueler than a swift death. She was condemned to live on a remote, desolate island, far across the churning, unforgiving seas, a place shunned by sailors and avoided by all living creatures. This island, often described as a barren, rocky outcrop, was a realm of eternal twilight, perpetually shrouded in a heavy mist that clung to the jagged cliffs. These cliffs rose from the dark, restless waters like skeletal fingers reaching towards a perpetually overcast sky, and the wind, ceaseless and cold, howled a mournful, unending dirge through its desolate crevices. No verdant life flourished there, no birds dared to nest in its crags, and certainly no other human soul dared to tread its shores. It was a prison forged of cold stone and unyielding despair, a place where the very air seemed to carry the bitter weight of her unending sorrow and the silent echoes of her former life. In this stark, unforgiving wilderness, Medusa existed in a state of profound, agonizing loneliness. Her days were an endless cycle of despair, marked only by the constant chilling presence of her serpentine hair, whose cold scales brushed against her skin, and the terrifying power of her gaze. She could not look upon herself, for her own reflection in any pool of water or smooth stone would instantly turn her to stone, a cruel irony for one whose beauty had once been her greatest pride. She could not seek comfort in the touch of another, for any living creature, be it a curious seabird or a stray animal that stumbled upon her isolated domain, would be instantly petrified, transformed into a cold, inanimate statue, frozen in its final moment of terror or unwitting approach. These petrified forms, silent and grotesque, became her only companions, grim, unmoving monuments to her cursed existence, unwitting witnesses to her eternal torment. Her once vibrant spirit, accustomed to the solemn rituals and peaceful devotion of the temple, to the warmth of human interaction and the reverence of supplicants, was now utterly consumed by bitterness and a gnawing sense of profound injustice. She, the innocent priestess dedicated wholly to her goddess, now bore the full, crushing weight of a punishment intended for another, a divine decree that had irrevocably shattered her world. The memory of her former life, of the soft warmth of the sun on her human hair, of the gentle murmurs of prayer within the sacred walls, became a distant, mocking echo, a phantom limb of a life forever lost. She was no longer Medusa, the beautiful priestess. She was Medusa, the Gorgon, a creature of myth and terror, forever defined by her monstrous form and her absolute isolation. This solitary confinement was not merely a physical separation from the world, it was a relentless psychological torture, a constant vivid reminder of what she had lost and what she could never, ever reclaim. Every rustle of the wind through the sparse, thorny bushes, every crash of the waves against the shore below seemed to echo her deepening despair, a relentless auditory manifestation of her fate. The vast, empty horizon stretched before her, offering no hope of escape, no promise of redemption, only the endless expanse of a sea that had carried her to this desolate prison. She was trapped, a living embodiment of a tragic accident, forever bound by the irreversible consequences of a god's uncontrollable, selfish desire and a goddess's unyielding, devastating wrath. The island became her living tomb, a place where her once celebrated beauty was utterly obliterated, and her very identity was irrevocably transformed into a symbol of universal fear. Her curse was not just a physical affliction, it was an eternal prison for her soul, ensuring that she would never again know peace, never again experience warmth, and never again see the world through eyes that did not turn all to stone. She was a perpetual warning, etched into the very fabric of myth, a chilling tale of beauty undone and innocence irrevocably lost, all because of an impulsive, destructive act that reverberated through the divine and mortal realms, creating a monster out of a maiden and a legend out of a tragedy. Her existence became a stark, desolate echo of the moment Poseidon's desire overshadowed the sanctity of Athena's hallowed ground, a testament to how swiftly divine retribution could transform the innocent into the terrifying, and how a single unholy act could forevermore shatter a life. The whispers began subtly, carried on the sea winds, from the desolate island where Medusa now dwelt, a place no mortal dared to name. Sailors who by ill fortune or navigational error dared to stray too close to its jagged, mist-shrouded coastline returned with chilling tales. They spoke of monstrous figures, half glimpsed through the swirling fog, their heads writhing with countless serpents, their eyes burning with an unholy light. Fishermen, casting their nets in distant waters, hauled in not only their catch, but also strange, horrifying discoveries. Petrified shapes on the ocean floor, once living creatures, now cold, lifeless stone, their final terrified expressions frozen forever. These were not mere rumors, they were undeniable, chilling echoes of a divine curse radiating outward from that isolated place of suffering, touching the shores of the mainland and seeping into the collective consciousness of the Hellenic world. The fear of Medusa, the Gorgon, began to root itself deeply in the hearts of mortals across the entire land. It was a unique kind of terror, unlike the primal dread of wild beasts or the righteous anger of vengeful gods. It was the dread of an immediate, irreversible transformation, a fate that stripped away one's very essence. To look upon her was to cease to be, to become a cold, lifeless statue, trapped forever in the final, agonizing moment of recognition, a silent monument to one's own demise. This was a fate more terrifying to many than death itself, for it denied even the release of oblivion, leaving only an eternal, stony vigil. The very thought of encountering her sent shivers down spines, making seasoned warriors pause, their hands instinctively tightening on their sword hilts, and brave explorers, known for their daring, turned back from any path that led towards the western seas. As the chilling story spread from bustling port to quiet village, carried by wary merchants, fearful travelers, and returning soldiers, the image of Medusa solidified in the collective consciousness. She was no longer remembered as the beautiful priestess, the innocent victim of a mighty god's lust and a powerful goddess's overwhelming wrath. She was solely the Gorgon, a creature of pure, unadulterated horror, a monstrous entity that existed only to inflict terror. Her name became a potent cautionary tale whispered to disobedient children to ensure their compliance, a dark omen invoked by those who sought to instill profound fear in their enemies. Ancient maps of the known world, once filled with vibrant details of thriving cities and fertile lands, now marked her island with a stark, ominous warning, often depicted with a skull or a stylized serpent, a place to be avoided at all costs by any sensible sailor. Ships gave it an unnervingly wide berth, their sails taut with urgent speed, their crews scanning the horizon with anxious, desperate eyes, dreading even the distant sight of that accursed, mist-shrouded land. The fear she inspired was amplified by the profound lack of clear understanding surrounding her existence. Mortals struggled to comprehend how such radiant beauty could be so horribly twisted, how divine punishment could be so absolute and enduring. Some believed she was a primordial demon, born from the deepest abysses of the earth. Others, a vengeful spirit of the underworld, unleashed to plague the living. Few remembered the true cause of her transformation, the act of desecration committed by Poseidon within Athena's sacred temple, or the crushing, unyielding weight of Athena's divine fury. The original sin, the profound violation that started it all, was gradually lost in the ever-growing monstrous shadow of her terrifying form. Medusa became a potent symbol of the unknown, of the arbitrary and terrifying power that could strip away one's humanity and freeze it in time, leaving behind only a silent, stony echo. Her enforced isolation, once conceived as a harsh punishment, now became an inadvertent reinforcement of her terrifying legend. No one dared to approach her desolate dwelling, ensuring that the stories remained unverified by direct observation, leaving ample room for vivid, horrified imaginations to fill in the most gruesome and fantastical details. The ceaseless winds carried the mournful sound of the crashing waves against the jagged black cliffs, and in the minds of those who heard them, it was easily misinterpreted as the chilling hiss of countless serpents, or the tormented, mournful cries of a damned and suffering soul. The very air around her island seemed to hum with a malevolent, palpable energy, a silent, pervasive warning to any who might even briefly entertain the foolhardy thought of venturing near. Generations grew up with the chilling legend of Medusa, their understanding of the world shaped by the terrifying tales passed down through oral tradition, from elder to child, from bard to audience. Artists depicted her with horrifying, vivid accuracy, her serpentine hair and petrifying eyes becoming iconic images of terror. Warriors preparing for battle donned protective amulets bearing her grotesque visage, ironically hoping to ward off evil with the very symbol of ultimate dread. Her name, once belonging to a gentle, devoted priestess, was now universally synonymous with unspeakable dread, a testament to how swiftly and completely a person's identity could be consumed by a single catastrophic event, transforming them from a being of grace and beauty into an emblem of fear, forever etched into the intricate, enduring fabric of mortal mythology. Her story became a stark reminder of the unpredictable and often cruel nature of the gods, and how their impulsive actions could irrevocably alter the course of a mortal life, turning a moment of beauty into an eternity of monstrous despair. The chilling tales of her petrifying gaze ensured that her legend, born of tragedy, continued to spread, painting a stark portrait of divine wrath and mortal helplessness. The terrifying legend of Medusa, the Gorgon, with the petrifying gaze, had spread across the land, making her a creature of widespread fear and dread. Her island exile, a desolate sanctuary, was known across the Hellenic world, a place shrouded in the whispers of madness and stone. Yet, even the most formidable terrors sometimes intersect with the lives of the unsuspecting. And so it was that the fate of Medusa, the cursed priestess, would become inextricably intertwined with that of a young hero named Perseus. His story, like many involving the divine, began not with a grand destiny, but with fear and manipulation. Perseus was born under the most unusual circumstances, a testament to the unpredictable and often cruel will of the Olympian gods. His mother was Danae, the exquisite daughter of Acrisius, the king of Argos, a powerful city-state in the Peloponnese. A dire oracle, a prophecy delivered by the revered priests of Delphi, had foretold that King Acrisius would one day be killed by his own grandson. This revelation filled the king with a profound dread, a cold fear that gnawed at his very soul. To prevent this grim destiny, Acrisius, in a desperate and misguided attempt to defy fate, imprisoned his beautiful daughter Danae within a stout bronze tower. He hoped to keep her from ever encountering a man, thus ensuring she would never bear a child. But even the thickest bronze walls and the most formidable iron bars could not thwart the boundless desire of a god. Zeus, the mighty king of the gods, descended upon Danae in a shimmering shower of golden rain, a divine visitation, and from this ethereal union, Perseus was miraculously conceived. King Acrisius, upon discovering the birth of his grandson, was consumed by renewed terror. Still unwilling to directly harm his own flesh and blood, yet desperate to avoid his prophesied end, he resorted to a more passive, yet equally brutal, method. He placed Danae and the infant Perseus into a sturdy wooden chest, sealed it, and cast it mercilessly into the vast, indifferent expanse of the Aegean Sea. He wished for the waves to carry them far away to a silent, watery demise, believing he had outsmarted destiny. Yet fate, as it often does, had other plans, intricate and unforeseen. The chest, guided by unseen forces, drifted safely across the currents until it came to rest upon the sun-drenched rocky shores of the island of Seriphos, a small, unassuming land governed by King Polydectes. It was here that a kind and humble fisherman named Dictys, brother to the king, discovered the floating chest and its precious living cargo. He brought the mother and child to the king's court, where they were initially received with a degree of hospitality. However, this peace was not destined to last. King Polydectes, a man whose ambition often outweighed his wisdom, soon developed a cruel and relentless infatuation with Danae. He wished to marry her, to make her his queen, but Perseus, now grown into a strong, courageous, and fiercely protective young man, stood as a constant obstacle. He shielded his mother from the king's increasingly unwelcome advances, his very presence a silent defiance. Polydectes, cunning and ruthless in his desires, began to devise a treacherous plan to rid himself of Perseus, to eliminate the protector so he could claim the mother. He announced a grand feast, a deceptive celebration ostensibly to gather splendid gifts for Hippodamia, a noble woman he feigned he wished to marry. Every guest of honor was expected to bring a magnificent horse as a suitable offering. Perseus, being poor and having no horse or means to acquire one, found himself in a deeply embarrassing and vulnerable position. When Polydectes, with a malicious glint in his eye, singled him out, publicly mocking his inability to contribute a worthy gift, Perseus, fueled by youthful pride, a burning sense of shame, and a desperate desire to prove himself, rashly declared that he would bring any gift the king desired, no matter how impossible or perilous the task. Polydectes, seizing this golden opportunity with a feigned smile that barely concealed his true, sinister intentions, immediately demanded the head of Medusa. This was a task that no mortal had ever achieved, nor was ever truly expected to. The very thought of facing the Gorgon, whose hideous gaze turned all living things to lifeless stone, was enough to paralyze even the bravest and most battle-hardened warriors. Polydectes believed this impossible quest would undoubtedly ensure Perseus's swift and certain death, leaving Danae utterly vulnerable and free for him to claim without further interference. He spoke of the deed as the ultimate testament to Perseus's unparalleled courage, knowing full well it was a carefully constructed death sentence. Perseus, bound by his hasty public vow and the immense pressure of the king's cruel challenge, had no honorable choice but to accept. He stood before the assembled court, a young hero, not yet fully aware of the divine assistance he would soon receive, thrust into a quest of unimaginable peril. He was tasked with slaying a monster that embodied the raw, untamed force of divine wrath, armed with nothing but his innate courage and a desperate hope to protect his mother. His journey was not one of glory consciously sought, but of a devoted son protecting his parent, forced into a confrontation with a creature born of a god's profound transgression and a goddess's unyielding fury. The path ahead was shrouded in fear and uncertainty, a labyrinth of dangers. Yet Perseus, with a heavy heart but an unyielding, resolute spirit, prepared to embark on what seemed to be a suicidal mission, a desperate gamble against insurmountable odds. Perseus, a young man of noble birth but limited experience, stood before the daunting task laid upon him by King Polydectes. To slay Medusa, a monster whose very gaze turned flesh to stone, seemed an insurmountable challenge for any mortal, let alone one who possessed no divine weapons or extraordinary powers of his own. The weight of this impossible quest settled upon him, a chilling realization of the king's cruel intent. Polydectes had no expectation of Perseus's return. This was merely a ploy to rid himself of the protective son and claim Danae, Perseus's mother, for his own. Yet, even in the shadow of such despair, fate, or perhaps a more subtle divine hand, was already at work, weaving a path for the young hero. It was then that Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, chose to intervene. Her motives were complex, as are often the ways of the Olympian gods. While it was her own fury that had transformed Medusa from a beautiful priestess into a monstrous Gorgon, the desecration of her temple by Poseidon, and the subsequent violation of Medusa, though leading to Medusa's curse, left a stain on her sacred space that only the complete eradication of the offending entity could truly cleanse. Medusa, in Athena's divine reckoning, had become a perpetual reminder of that transgression, a living monument to a deed that dishonored the goddess. To allow Medusa to continue her existence even in exile was to allow the lingering echo of Poseidon's insult to persist. Furthermore, Athena, ever the champion of order and justice, saw in Perseus a tool, an instrument through which a distorted balance could be restored, and perhaps a subtle form of retribution enacted against Poseidon, whose impulsive act had ignited this tragic chain of events. It was a cold, calculating form of divine assistance, not born of pity for Medusa, but of a greater, more intricate design. Athena appeared before Perseus not in a blaze of overwhelming glory, but with an air of quiet authority and purposeful intent. She recognized the young man's inherent courage and his desperate need for guidance. Her words were direct, cutting through his despair with the precision of a master strategist. She knew that a direct confrontation with Medusa was suicide. The Gorgon's gaze was inescapable in a head-on attack. Therefore, the key to victory lay in avoiding that fatal stare. From her own divine arsenal, Athena provided Perseus with a gift of immeasurable value, a highly polished bronze shield. This was no ordinary shield. Its surface was so reflective, so perfectly burnished, that it could serve as a mirror, allowing Perseus to observe Medusa's movements and approach her safely, without ever meeting her eyes directly. With this shield, the reflection would guide his hand, turning Medusa's greatest weapon against herself. But a shield alone was not enough. Medusa's skin, like that of her Gorgon sisters, was said to be impenetrable to ordinary weapons. For this, another divine ally was needed. Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, known for his cunning and his magical artifacts, also lent his aid. He presented Perseus with a curved sword or a scimitar, crafted not of mortal bronze or iron, but of a material called adamantine, or perhaps a form of divine steel, so sharp and strong that it could sever even the toughest hide. This blade was specifically designed for the task, ensuring that when the opportune moment arrived, Perseus's strike would be decisive and effective. With these essential tools in hand, Perseus was given the next crucial piece of information: the location of the Graeae. These ancient beings, three sisters known as Pemphredo, Enyo, and Dano, were the personifications of old age. They lived in a desolate, windswept land at the very edge of the world, shrouded in perpetual twilight. Their existence was peculiar and unsettling. They shared a single eye and a single tooth, passing them amongst themselves as needed. They were the keepers of ancient knowledge, privy to secrets that even the gods sometimes overlooked, and they knew the way to the nymphs, who possessed the remaining magical items Perseus would require. Perseus, following Athena's instructions, embarked on his perilous journey. The path to the Grail was fraught with danger, leading him through desolate landscapes and across wind-swept plains, far from the familiar world of men. Finally, he arrived at their grim dwelling, the site of the three hags, withered and ancient, their solitary eye blinking as it was passed from one to another, was unsettling, but Perseus remained resolute. He waited for the precise moment when one sister would remove the eye to pass it to another, a fleeting instant of complete blindness for all three. With swift and silent movement, Perseus seized the eye, holding it hostage. The Graea, plunged into darkness and utterly dependent on their shared sense of sight, cried out in despair and fear. Their pleas were guttural, their voices raspy with age and desperation. Perseus, holding their precious eye, refused to return it until they divulged the information he sought. He was respectful yet firm, understanding the power he now wielded over them. Cornered and helpless, the ancient sisters reluctantly revealed the hidden location of the nymphs, the elusive minor goddesses who guarded the final pieces of his divine equipment. Once he had extracted the necessary information, Perseus, true to his word, returned the eye to the Graea, leaving them to their eternal twilight and their peculiar existence. Guided by the Graea's unwilling revelation, Perseus continued his arduous journey, now knowing the direction to the nymphs. These benevolent spirits, often associated with nature and specific locales, were unlike the terrifying Gorgons or the ancient withered Graeae. They resided in a place of natural beauty and tranquility, a stark contrast to the desolate lands he had just traversed. Upon finding them, the nymphs, perhaps already aware of his divine mission through the subtle workings of fate, or perhaps informed by Athena herself, willingly presented Perseus with three more indispensable gifts, each vital for his success against Medusa. First, they gave him the winged sandals, divine footwear that allowed the wearer to soar through the air with incredible speed and agility. These were often associated with Hermes, and their possession granted Perseus the gift of flight, enabling him to approach Medusa's lair from above, minimizing the risk of accidental encounter on the ground and providing a crucial advantage for escape after the deed was done. Second, they bestowed upon him the cap of darkness, also known as the helm of Hades. This magical helmet, when worn, rendered the wearer completely invisible, not just to mortal eyes, but even to the keen sight of gods and monsters. This would be invaluable for infiltrating Medusa's lair undetected, for maneuvering into position without alerting the Gorgon sisters, and for making a swift, unseen retreat. The power of invisibility was paramount in ensuring his survival in the face of such a formidable foe. Finally, the nymphs provided him with a special pouch, often described as a kybelesis, a magically expanding or self-containing bag. This seemingly simple item was crucial, for Medusa's head, even after separation from her body, retained its petrifying power. The kybelesis was designed to safely contain the Gorgon's head, preventing its deadly gaze from affecting Perseus or anyone else once he had severed it. It ensured that the very trophy of his victory would not become the instrument of his demise. With these gifts, Athena's reflective shield, Hermes' adamantine sword, the nymph's winged sandals, cap of darkness, and kybelesis, Perseus was finally equipped for the impossible task. He was no longer just a young man sent on a fool's errand. He was now a divinely armed and guided hero, ready to face the monster that Athena herself had created. The goddess's intervention was a testament to her complex nature. She was the architect of Medusa's curse, yet also the enabler of her destruction. It was a stark reminder that the gods' plans often intertwine punishment with purpose, and that even the most tragic of fates can serve a larger, inscrutable divine design. Perseus, armed with the tools of the gods and the cunning born of necessity, set his course for the desolate island where Medusa, in her lonely and monstrous existence, awaited the fulfillment of a destiny shaped by others. He knew his journey was far from over, but now, finally, he possessed the means to confront the terror that awaited him. His path, though guided by divine hands, remained his own to walk, leading him closer to the moment of truth, the climax of this tragic tale that began with a god's desire and a goddess's wrath. Armed with the wisdom of the gods and the gifts of magic, Perseus flew over the vast, shimmering sea, his winged sandals carrying him swiftly towards the desolate island where Medusa and her sisters, the Gorgons, resided. This was a place shrouded in perpetual mist, a land touched by an ancient, chilling silence. As he drew closer, the true horror of Medusa's existence became starkly visible. Scattered across the landscape were the petrified forms of men and beasts, frozen forever in their final moments of terror, their expressions of shock and despair etched into stone. These were the unfortunate souls who had dared to gaze upon Medusa's face and had paid the ultimate price. The air itself seemed heavy with sorrow and the weight of countless forgotten lives, a silence broken only by the mournful lapping of the waves against the rocky shore. Perseus, guided by Athena's foresight, knew that direct eye contact would be his undoing. He descended carefully, landing silently amidst the stone figures, his heart beating a steady rhythm against his ribs. He located the cave where the Gorgons slumbered. The scene within was chilling. 3 monstrous figures, their serpentine hair hissing softly even in sleep, their scales glinting dully in the dim light. Medusa lay in the center, her form more striking even in repose, her story a silent scream of injustice. Perseus raised his highly polished bronze shield, using its surface as a mirror, allowing him to see Medusa's reflection without looking directly at her. His hand tightened around the hilt of the curved adamantine sword, a gift from the gods themselves, capable of cutting through the toughest hide, sharp enough to cleave through stone itself if necessary. With precise, deliberate movements, he approached, his cap of invisibility ensuring his presence remained unseen. He moved with the quiet grace of a hunter, every breath controlled, every step measured. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of ancient earth and the metallic tang of something unearthly. When he was close enough, he swung the sword with a single, swift, and decisive stroke. The blade, sharp beyond mortal forging, severed Medusa's head from her body cleanly. It was a swift, almost merciful end to a life that had become a torment, a release from her endless suffering. Yet, from the gushing blood that poured from Medusa's neck, 2 remarkable beings sprang forth, a testament to the strange and powerful forces at play in her creation. First, Pegasus, a magnificent winged horse, pure white, soared into the sky, a creature of beauty and freedom born from such a dark moment. Second, Chrysaor, a giant warrior wielding a golden sword, emerged, a symbol of brute strength and a reflection of the violence from which he was conceived. These were the unexpected children of Poseidon's fleeting desire and Medusa's tragic transformation, born from the very act that ended her cursed existence. The sound of Medusa's demise, however, stirred her two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Their eyes, once closed in sleep, snapped open, blazing with fury and a desire for vengeance. They rose, their snake hair writhing, their monstrous forms casting long, terrifying shadows. Their roars of anguish and rage echoed through the cave, threatening to shatter the very stone. But Perseus, quick-witted and prepared, had already scooped Medusa's head into the special pouch given to him by the nymphs. He donned the cap of invisibility once more, vanishing from their sight, and with the aid of his winged sandals, he ascended into the air, escaping their clutches. The Gorgons, immortal and furious, pursued him, their powerful wings beating the air with a thunderous sound, their hisses filling the void. But they could not see him. Their cries of frustrated rage faded behind him as he soared away, carrying his grim trophy into the vast blue expanse. Perseus's journey back was filled with further trials, where Medusa's head, even in death, proved its terrifying power. He flew over distant lands and at one point encountered the mighty Titan Atlas, condemned to hold the sky upon his shoulders. Atlas, weary from his eternal burden, rudely refused Perseus' hospitality. In retribution, Perseus drew Medusa's head from his pouch, turning the defiant Titan into a towering mountain range, solid and unmoving, still seemingly supporting the heavens. Later, he used the head to rescue the beautiful princess Andromeda from a sea monster, turning her arrogant suitor Phineus and his followers to stone, transforming them into lifeless statues, frozen monuments to their folly. The head, though lifeless, remained a potent weapon, a tool of absolute power, capable of turning any living being into cold, unfeeling rock with a mere glance. Upon his triumphant return, Perseus presented Medusa's head to Athena, the goddess who had guided him and who, in a twisted turn of fate, was responsible for Medusa's monstrous form. Athena, ever practical and strategic, did not simply discard the head. Instead, she took the severed head of Medusa, the once beautiful priestess, the cursed monster, and affixed it to the center of her aegis, her formidable shield. This was no mere ornament. It was a potent symbol, a weapon of psychological warfare. The image of Medusa, with her terrifying serpentine hair and her petrifying gaze, became a permanent fixture on Athena's shield, embodying both protection and terror for her enemies. It served as a constant reminder of the goddess's power and her unwavering justice, even if that justice was born from a moment of profound wrath and unforgiving judgment. Thus, Medusa, the victim of Poseidon's impulsive act and Athena's furious retribution, found her lasting legacy not in beauty or reverence, but in her monstrous form, immortalized as a symbol of fear and defense. Her story, born from a god's desire and a goddess's rage, serves as a dark echo of how even the most powerful beings can, through their actions, inadvertently create indelible marks on the tapestry of existence, leaving behind a legacy that forever intertwines beauty with horror and purity with desecration. The story of Medusa is a tragic tale of transformation, not just of a woman into a monster, but of an act of violence into a legend, forever etched into the annals of myth, a warning whispered through the ages for all to hear.